Evan Ingram, man. I think Evan Ingram is a guy that we probably haven't talked about enough yet. And someone I just kind of, when I'm doing tight end rankings, I just slot him into generally like kind of where he goes consensus wise. But, if you look at the first part of the season, it's a nice for the Denver Broncos. They've got the Titans, which, like honestly, the tight end strength of schedule stuff is a little noisy to me because so much of it is just about like who scored touchdowns and who didn't. But I think the Titans are definitely a secondary that's in flux. That whole defense is kind of interesting. I don't really know where I stand on the Titans defense this year. I mentioned the Colts, where I do think their perimeter coverage is going to be a little bit better this year. They could be vulnerable over the middle of the field. The Chargers, that's one defense that I really, really like here, my favorite defense that's on the ledger, but they get the Bengals in week 4. The Bengals gave it up to everybody last year. They're going to be giving it up to everybody this year from a defensive perspective. So Evan Ingram's a guy that could get off to a nice hot start to the season here, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on him just in general as a fantasy pick this year.
I haven't been super high on him. I've found in the past that with his previous team, he's been one of those guys where it really requires some injuries to the receiving core before he starts to go off. And we saw that in Jacksonville. Everybody remembers where he finished the season strong a couple of years ago, and he was the number 1 scoring tight end in fantasy points per game down the stretch. And yet that occurred after Christian Kirk got hurt, and they really didn't have a top receiver to go to at the time. So all tight ends are going to benefit from a situation like that. But I think often we see certain tight ends really flourish when there's injuries in the receiving core, and when everyone's healthy, they're very inconsistent and guys that you can't necessarily trust. Now, the thing that's bringing me around on Ingram more, and again, you don't want to overrate, some of the training camp talk, some of the quotes that are coming out, but basically everybody around the Broncos is saying that the ball is going to him a lot in practice. And that's something that I've also noted about Tucker Kraft. Now, Tucker Kraft dealing with an injury, and we'll talk about him in a second, but Tucker Kraft was getting a lot of work in practice. That made me bump him up because he's in an offense where he could be a pretty big part of that offense. He could be one of the top target getters. I think the same could be said for Ingram, right? You look at the receiving core in Denver, not totally proven. Like, I like Pat Bryant. Cortland Sutton had a good season, but Cortland Sutton's not like a volume hog by any means. That's not the kind of receiver that he is. So could Ingram come in and get a ton of volume and end up being a pretty good fantasy tight end? Absolutely. And he's in that range. Like, I have him ranked right around David Njoku and Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews and Ingram. I think you could make an argument for any of those guys being at the top of that tier. And I kind of struggle with it. When I've seen these reports coming out about Ingram, I've wanted to move him up. I think you could very easily make a case for him being at the top of that tier and him moving up to like tight end 6. I often don't take the guys in that range because I think the name value pushes them up the board a little too much. So I end up dropping back and grabbing, if I don't get one of the elite guys, I end up dropping back and grabbing somebody from the tier after that I have, like Tucker Kraft, Dalton Kincaid, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren. That's kind of the area that I tend to get my tight end from if I don't get one of the elite guys. But you could make cases for all those veterans in that tier above them. And Ingram, the news that he is getting a lot of work in training camp makes me a lot more interested in him potentially having a pretty big role in this offense as long as he stays healthy.
Well, it makes sense, right? Because this is why I'm with you. I haven't really been drafting like tight ends in that range generally. It's either been go early, or for me, because I kind of would prefer to go elite quarterback as opposed to elite tight end, I've typically just sacrificed the tight end position. I've ended up with a lot of Tucker Kraft, Colson Loveland, some of those names you threw out earlier, even Jake Ferguson. I don't mind as like a late round tight end, one of the last teams to take a starting tight end. If that's usually me, those are 3 names that I'm looking at there. So I don't end up with a lot of Evan Ingram, but I think he fit this exercise because I talk about it all the time. Last year, it was Cortland Sutton and a bunch of dudes in his orbit. Nobody ran a route on more than 50% of the dropbacks last year other than Cortland Sutton. I think Ingram is the favorite to beat that, and that was not just wide receivers. That was tight ends. That was running backs. And I think that Pat Bryant is a good sleeper this year, but, rookies getting off to a hot start. He might be a guy that's more in the back half of the year. Mims is never going to be a guy, Marvin Mims, to be a high volume wide receiver because he's more of a gadget guy. So I just think there's a lot of room for Evan Ingram to get off to be a big part of this offense, especially early in the season because he's like a proven commodity. So even though I haven't drafted a lot of him, he was somebody that I thought was worth discussing because again, we haven't talked enough about him, and he does kind of fit this exercise. But let's get a downer in here, Boone. You've got for the cold tight end here somebody that you and I both really really like this year. So tell the people why Tucker Kraft. We like him, but he might not get off to the hottest start this year.
Yeah, one of my favorite breakout candidates. I'm not overly concerned about this groin issue that he's dealing with right now. We'll have to monitor that. He's going to miss a little bit of time, apparently. Hopefully, they're being honest about it. It's just, maintenance, and they're trying to get him back healthy. I guess he was playing through this injury, apparently, in practice recently, and they just decided to kind of shut him down for a few days and let him rest up. This is the time of year to do that. So I'm totally on board with it as long as that is all true. But you look at the season, the way it's going to start for him. He has to take on the Commanders, the Browns, and the Cowboys in the first month. They were all among the 7 hardest matchups for tight ends last season. Prior to those contests, he's got to go against the Lions. He's played the Lions 4 times since he entered the league. They've held him to 45 yards or less in all 4 of those meetings. So I'm a little bit worried that he might get off to a bit of a slow start. Now, if that does happen, then for sure he's going to be a guy that we're trying to buy low in redraft, or that you're going to be trying to pick up off the waiver wire if his team doesn't make it through in Guillotine leagues. Because yes, I still believe in him as a player, the yak ability, the amount of volume that I think he's going to get in this offense. It's all pointing positive except for that start for him.
Yeah, the start is a little tough. And again, coming into the season banged up, that's never what you want. You want your guys to come in perfectly healthy. But yeah, I think he's definitely somebody that could be good over the long term. So not super concerned about the injury, but or the start to the season. But again, in this exercise, he is worth talking about. And not to mention too, like when we're talking about Tucker Kraft and liking him from a fantasy perspective, you are still betting on like efficiency and big plays as opposed to a ton of volume, right? Like I actually would bet that Evan Ingram's going to see more targets than a guy like Tucker Kraft on the season. But I think like the targets for Kraft could be more high yield. So if this is one of those slate of defenses where you're not going to be able to push the big play button a ton with Kraft, that's sort of where the lower scoring might come in. So while it does break my heart to say anything negative about Tucker Kraft, as a potential slow start candidate here, Boone. But before we throw to break, I did just want to give a quick honorable mention to Mark Andrews as a guy who could start the season hot because, again, we're talking about injuries. Isaiah Likely is banged up right now. He might miss, with a foot injury, he might miss like 6 to 8 weeks. That's a pretty lengthy timeline. That's going to take us into the regular season. And Mark Andrews, I think, is a guy that they kind of wanted to lighten his load, Boone, because you and I were joking, like he's not an older, like he's not Travis Kelce old or something like that, even though people seem to talk about him like he's washed up or ancient or whatever. I guess because he took a slight step back last season, but I think they did want to play him on fewer snaps generally because I think they wanted to get Likely more work. But well, guess what? That's obviously going to go out the window at this point. So if you're looking for just like safe, reliable production in the early part of the season, I do think that Mark Andrews profiles really well as one of those guys.
Yeah, and Andrews last year, I know he's not among like the elite producers at the position anymore, but tight end 7 in fantasy points per game last year. That's not bad. That's right around where he's going in drafts right now. And his best performance of the season did occur when Likely was out. Likely missed 1 game. Andrews goes out and puts up 6 for 68 and a touchdown. That week he was the tight end with the second most fantasy points. Could we see him potentially have elite production for a game or a couple games if Likely sitting out? I definitely think that's possible. And you mentioned it. I mean, another guy who he turns 30 in September, but he's not even 30 yet. He's 29. So it's not like George Kittle, who's 31. It's not like Kelce, who's in his mid 30s. Like Andrews is still fairly young, but he dealt with some injuries last year. Hopefully he's going to be healthy and hopefully can get off to a really hot start if Likely's missing.